started here. So this question came in from Ryan here in Office Hour, or in support Slack, actually. He said, Office Hours question, entering the 150 max 5 cent on FanDuel. Maybe it's the 50 cent, actually. I know they have both. So either way, doesn't matter. To feel out that type of contest, I keep seeing many that run one lineup trains for all 150. Is this a strategy? I have to assume it's intentional, but maybe not. And then I actually responded to this just briefly. And I basically said that, you never really want to be duplicated in your lineups. And we'll talk about why in a second. So I think when you see lineup trains, typically what you're probably seeing is a player that either put a dummy lineup in and failed to update it, which definitely happens. I've been there, actually. Or somebody that just hasn't really kind of thought this through. And maybe there's, I think, some single entry players out there that do this, that only want to build one lineup and max out multi-entry contests with their single entry lineup. You never want to do that. So even if you're going to be a single entry player, you're just going to play one lineup every night. You should be entering it into all the single entry contests first. And if you need to get more action, you only want to enter it one time into the multi-entry contest. And we will go ahead and show you why here. So I put together a little spreadsheet here, and let me make this a little bit bigger since I'm not using very much of the page here. Oh, that's not what let's see. There we go. Okay. So I've got my little spreadsheet here. So I'm going to use a very basic example here, and we're going to assume that this is a 100-person contest. It's $10 to enter. So the prize pool is $10,000. There's no rake for the sake of example here. And I'm just going to assume it's a single entry. It keeps it a little bit more simple, but this is basically just to demonstrate mathematically why you don't want to be duplicated by anyone, right? So least of all by yourself, right? We'll work around back to that, but you don't want to be duplicated by anybody. So it's a top-heavy contest, this hypothetical contest, where first is going to win 500, half the pot, second's going to win 250, third's going to win 150, fourth 100, and by fifth place and all the way down to the end, nobody wins anything, right? So I went ahead here and basically said, what is your return on investment if you win these different prizes, right? So if you pay $10 and you win first, you win 500, you're going to win 49x, right? So you're going to win 400, you're going to profit $490 on your $10 investment. You're 49xing your investment. I realize maybe that's not the exact definition of ROI, but that's kind of just the way I put this together here. And so on, right? You 24x at second place, you 14x at third, and you 9x at fourth, and then you negative 1x your return at fifth, right? If we look at what happens, and this is, again, just only saying we get duplicated once. So there's one other player that duplicates our lineup. If multiple people duplicate you, this effect just gets compounded. But what happens when we are duplicated once? So let's say we win first, but we're tied because somebody else has that lineup. What the sites do is they take the winnings of first and second and divide them by the number of people that tied, in this case 2. And that gets paid out equally to both people. So in this case, we take 500 plus 250 divided by 2. That's something 750 divided by 2, 375. Yeah. And then we 36.5x our investment, right? So already you're kind of seeing the trend here. Our total return on a lineup that was still won first goes down because we got duplicated, right? And the last kind of way that we can kind of show this is I'm going to just assume, for example, that you are a prodigy at this particular contest. This is not realistic at all. But let's say that you've mastered this contest. You know exactly how to play it. You play it perfectly every time. And your outcomes are only limited to the payout positions. So 25% of the time you win first, 25% of the time you win second, 25% of the time you win third, and 25% of the time you win fourth, right? You never fail to profit in this contest. So we can also look at this from an expected value standpoint. An expected value is basically going to be your payout, what you stand to gain, times the probability of every outcome happening. So in reality, in a typical DFS contest, right, this isn't actually how your probability curve looks. You have a lot of no cash equity. You have some min cash equity. You probably hopefully have some first place equity and so on. But just for the sake of example, if you know that you are never going to be duplicated, your expected value here in this contest is $240. Every time you put $10 in, you can expect to win $240 coming out of that, right? If you are duplicated once, if you're just guaranteed to be duplicated, your expected value, even in a contest that you are just vastly this profitable on, drops pretty significantly down to $178 because your payouts are so much lower. So being duplicated in any contest, period, end of story, is reducing your expected value of that lineup, and it's reducing your overall ROI playing that contest. So it only gets worse the more you are duplicated. Duplicating yourself 150 times in a contest is a terrible idea. It dramatically reduces the expected value of the lineup that you're playing, right? You only have one lineup. And you're even investing. Why it's worse when you do it yourself is because you're paying extra to do that, right? Like to enter the one single lineup in the, say it is the 5 cent, right? To pay the 1 5 cent entry into the contest is one thing. Imagine if you were paying to duplicate yourself in this contest. So it would emphasize this even further. Like now this would go down further because you're actually paying like $20 you're paying more to lower your ROI, or you're paying more to lower your expected value, right? Whatever really makes sense there. I get these terms kind of mixed up in my head sometimes. But so it really don't want to duplicate yourself, right? Really ruins your profitability. It is also a good just note in general here of talking about why we want to avoid dupes. And in your average baseball slate or basketball slate or football slate, like these slates where there are a lot of different positions and a lot of different players in the pool, duplications can still happen. I think that's part of the value of ownership fade. That's part of the value of fading some ownership in general, because you want to avoid dupes, right? The bigger value of fading ownership is getting leverage on the field, and the impact of having the 1% guy that goes off in your lineup boosts you way to the top, right? That's the primary impact. But on sports where duplication is more possible, I think this factor ends up actually becoming a greater reason to fade ownership than finding leverage. So in sports like MMA and golf and showdowns, in many sports, the impact of trying to reduce duplication becomes a greater factor in deciding why we want to fade ownership or why we want to build lineups in a certain way. To the point where I think even on things like NFL Showdown, where you're playing contests that have like sometimes 100,000 people on a single showdown lineup, this maybe even becomes the primary factor. Our goal in creating an unduplicated or a very minimally duplicated lineup becomes so much higher than wanting to fade ownership in terms of finding leverage. And it's just something interesting to think about, right? I think I'd like to talk a little bit more. To me, these are kinds of two sides of the coin of fading ownership, of why we want to do that one way or the other. And this is why mathematically we don't want to be duplicated. I'd like to actually, I think now that I'm thinking about it, at some point, pull up a spreadsheet and do something similar, talking about the advantages that having leverage on the field can give you, mathematically speaking, because I think they're kind of two sides of the same coin. But anyway, as I typically do, probably going in maybe a little bit too much on this particular question, a little overboard here. But it's very easy to kind of just quickly set something up like this in a very simple contest format, and look at what happens to your ROI and your expected value when you are duplicated in a lineup. So really great question, Ryan. Thank you for asking that. Haven't had a chance to talk in depth about duplication